Prevalence of low-grade inflammation in depression, a systematic review and meta-analysis of CRP levels. Have you ever felt tired, struggling to get a good night's sleep and finding it nearly impossible to get out of bed in the morning? This is all too common when a nasty cold or the flu make their appearance. These feelings of fatigue and lack of motivation are the result of our bodies trying to fight off the illness. Our immune systems leverage a process called inflammation to make the sickness go away. But maybe some of you had something entirely different in mind when the initial question about tiredness was asked: depression. Why is it that this sickness behavior is similar when being ill with the flu and depression? Research has shown that inflammation itself might be the culprit. Depression is often thought of as an illness of thoughts and feelings, but over the last few decades, scientists have started to notice something else going on in the body as well. Many people with depression show signs of inflammation. This can also happen when there is no obvious infection. Inflammation is useful when catching a virus, but when it stays on at a low level for a long time, it can start to cause problems. Though depression is a common mental illness, with 10 to 20% of people suffering from it at some point in their life, its causes are complex and not fully understood. Emmanuel Felice Osimo from the Department of Psychiatry in the University of Cambridge and his colleagues from the University of Cambridge and University College London decided to look through multiple studies that had explored the link between inflammation and depression. Earlier research showed that, on average, people with depression may have higher levels of inflammation in the body than people without depression. But scientists still didn't know how common this was. In other words, how many people with depression actually have this kind of low-level inflammation? Is it most people or only a small group? And are people with depression more likely to have raised CRP than similar people without depression? In order to treat depression better, we need to understand it well. So this study set out to answer those questions by pulling together evidence from many studies rather than relying on just one. The researchers looked into one simple blood marker that shows inflammation and is called C-reactive protein, or CRP. CRP acts like a thermometer for inflammation. Higher numbers suggest more inflammation. Low-grade inflammation is usually marked by CRP levels of 3 mg per liter of blood or higher, while levels above 1 mg per liter are considered slightly higher than normal. Anything above 10 mg per liter is considered high and is found in patients fighting an ongoing infection. The researchers used a rigorous scientific method, a systematic review, to identify and combine other studies that had investigated the link between inflammation and depression. Then, to calculate the proportion of depressed patients who have signs of inflammation, as well as the likelihood of depressed patients having inflammation versus non-depressed people, they used meta-analysis. This is a statistical method that can help researchers combine numbers from many different sources and to estimate an effect. The researchers use statistical techniques that give more weight to larger, better studies and allow for differences between studies, and quality-checked all included studies. 37 studies comprising 13,541 patients and 155,728 healthy controls from different countries and settings, spanning diverse ethnic backgrounds and age groups, were included in the analysis. The results showed that approximately 1 in 4 depressed patients show evidence of low-grade inflammation. Additionally, depressed individuals are about 50% more likely to have evidence of inflammation compared to non-depressed people. These results didn't change even when the researchers excluded poor quality studies or studies comprising patients who had had depression in the past but displayed no symptoms at the time of the study. Finally, the researchers found that the likelihood of inflammation in depression was not affected by patient gender, age, body mass index, ethnicity, or the source of the samples included in the studies. Even when they excluded those with ongoing infections, the low-level inflammation in depressed people was still clearly detectable. These findings support previous studies on the link between inflammation and depression, and they also give us an idea about the numbers. Is inflammation more common in people with depression? About 16 out of 100 people without depression had it. That is lower than the 25 out of 100 with depression. However, earlier studies have sometimes found higher numbers in people without depression, even up to 30 out of 100. So the difference is not always the same in every study and may depend on whether people with chronic and acute illness were excluded, for example. Like all research, this study had both strengths and weaknesses. A major strength was its size. It combined data from many countries and thousands of participants, making the conclusions more reliable. The researchers also carefully checked the quality of the studies and repeated their analysis in different ways to make sure the results stayed consistent. However, there were limitations. The studies included were quite varied. They used different ways of diagnosing depression and measure people at different stages of illness. This created a lot of statistical noise called heterogeneity, which makes exact numbers harder to pin down. Also, CRP is a general marker of inflammation and doesn't show exactly where the inflammation is coming from. So while the study shows a link, it can't prove that inflammation actually causes depression. What do these results mean? The findings suggest that inflammation may play a role in depression for a significant group of people. This could help explain why some patients don't respond well to standard antidepressant medications. In the future, doctors might be able to use simple blood tests to identify patients whose depression is linked to inflammation and offer them different kinds of treatments, including anti-inflammatory medicines. The study encourages more research into personalized treatments rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. A helpful way to think about it is that depression may not be one single illness. Instead, it may be more like an umbrella that covers several different pathways, and inflammation appears to be one of them. For some people, inflammation may play a meaningful role in their symptoms. For others, it may not. Looking ahead, scientists should explore why some people with depression develop inflammation while others do not, how well people with inflammation respond to antidepressants, and test whether treatments that reduce inflammation can actually improve mood or lower risks for other diseases such as heart issues, considering that cardiovascular disease is linked to both inflammation and depression. Understanding this connection better could open the door to new ways of helping people with depression. In the end, this study reminds us that depression is not just in the mind or in the body, but often somewhere in between, where biology and experience meet. And listening to both may be the key to better care.